Hello, I'm Keith Robertson from the Scottish School of Herbal Medicine in the island of Arran off the west coast of Scotland, where we have live-in teaching, close encounters with plants, and also an international distance course.
Hello, my name is Daniel Rawe, and I practice in Belfast in the north of Ireland, and I also run a 4-year practitioner training program also in Belfast. And Keith and I both work together on our annual Celtic Herbal Intensive, which we hope to see some of you there maybe one year.
Yes, that happens in late August. And part of that collaboration has led to a little book that we'll tell you about later. So welcome. The format's going to be that Danny's going to talk a little about the history of Celtic herbal medicine. Then I'll talk a little bit about the energetics and the elemental system that we've developed from our experiential research here. And then we'll talk about some of our favourite herbs and then come back together in between and at the end to discuss them. We're passionate about experiential learning and staying with the plant, and you find things that you will not read in books. So we'll be using the local common names, and you may have heard of Gaelic, but have you heard of Gaelic? Well, they are two distinct languages. The Irish speak Gaelic, and we Scots speak Gaelic. It was never written down as a language, and they're obviously the two are dialects of the same language. It's a bit like a Glaswegian would be able to understand a Jamaican, for instance. But they are distinct languages with distinct spellings, and there seems to be lots and lots of variation from that.
So I'd like to begin by talking briefly about the historical background of the Celts, and then particularly how they used the elements to inform their practice of herbal medicine. So the practice of herbal medicine is undoubtedly ancient, and no less so in Europe's most western isles. These are the last outposts of an immense Celtic culture, which once dominated Europe and can be found today in areas of Spain, France, and Britain, but particularly in Ireland and Scotland, where the tradition is very much alive. The Celtic knotwork and traditional music are known the world over and are common in the land adorned with ancient megaliths and stone circles aligned to the heavens and the sowing and harvesting of crops. And it is this interrelationship with nature that is a common theme for all the tribes which archaeologists place under the Celtic banner. There are a number of different strands that have intertwined over the years to create a living and breathing tradition that we find today. Now, the Celts did not use the written word, and we rely on the testimonies of Greek and Roman scholars who made comments many centuries ago, as well as the archaeological record. So these Greek and Roman scholars are the first to tell us about the Celts and their mysterious druids who appear to have performed multiple roles in society. So there are a number of different scholars that we could consider, Hecateus, Herodotus, etc., etc. Aristotle is particularly interesting. He recounts that among the Greek races, it's customary to wash children at birth by dipping them in cold water, similar to Christian baptisms today. But for the Celts, this practice was used to kind of inure and strengthen children to the cold and the damp. Although the Celts revered the elements, they did not fear them. Aristotle reminds us how fearless they were to the point of recklessness. He says, "For even when knowing the greatness of the danger, the Celts take arms and march against the waves." It's this kind of sense of fearlessness which made them so formidable across Europe. But their belief in the Celtic in the transmigration of souls, or reincarnation, And also because they didn't have an origin myth, they had no beginnings or ends. They thought that life was just a perpetual cycle, and they found themselves within this cycle. And again, the role of the elements within this cycle becomes central. Next slide. So Julius Caesar recounts, they likewise discuss and impart to youth the many things respecting the stars and their motion, respecting the extent of the world and of our earth, respecting the nature of things, respecting the power and majesty of the immortal gods. Now, the Celtic tribes were animist in outlook. They believed that all things were living. For example, Maximus, writing in the 2nd century, notes that the Celts indeed worship Zeus, but they honour him in the form of a lofty oak. So it's these and other classical historians that give us an insight into how the ancient tribes read the Book of Nature, interpreted the Book of Nature, and used these associations and patterns to inform their practice of medicine. Pliny is the earliest scholar to write about the direct use of herbs by the Celts. It is he that tells us how they venerated the oak tree and the mistletoe herb in particular. But much later on, between around the 50th century and the Common Era, the Celts had begun to adopt the humoral system, which was coming out of ancient Greece. And this is no surprise, because this adaptation was universal across Celtic Europe, precisely because of its basis in the elements.
So, and now to the energetics of the Celts. We know that the Celts were a culture, not a genetic race. In order to join that culture, well, you had to learn the language. You also had to take on the moral code of the culture. And these were important things. The reverence for nature was a really important part of them. Fearlessness was another important part. And reverence for women, emancipation of women. Women could hold any post in Celtic culture. And these are the kind of things that attracts us to the Celts, and the fact that they read the Book of Nature and took the knowledge directly from nature, and we're passionately interested in that. So we have this appreciation of the 4 directions from many different cultures. In the Northern Hemisphere, north is cold, south is hot. The prevailing wind coming from the west. The weather in the west is wet, and the weather in the east is drier, even if it doesn't seem so at times. And so we've taken these 4 elements, the north being cold and earth, fire being hot and south, east being dry and air, the west being wet and water. And the Celts had 6 directions, the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, but also above and below. And so we were inspired by that to take our Celtic cross into a Celtic globe. And here we see the physical plane spread in the center here, hot, cold, wet and dry, or a combination of those, and the hotter you get, the further you come out from the center. And then we've reserved the up and down, the above and below, for the ether, and this gives us the idea of more of the psychospiritual realm, and we can plot our herbs on this, and also our patients. We'd like to reawaken the use of the elements, the understanding of the elements in the human body. And this is a mandala that I drew after drawing it for 30 years. And we see here in the center, see the earth, followed by the water, followed by air, followed by fire. And we're going to ascribe systems to each of these elements. We're going to say the earth is cold and governs the digestion and the bones. We're going to say water is wet and is for the urinary, fat, lymph, plumbing, the physical plumbing of immunity and sex. The air is dry and governs the lungs and the skin. Fire is hot and governs the nerves, the hormones and the muscles, all the control systems. The ether encompasses all and represents the spirit, the soul, the genetics and the epigenetics of us all, and immune control. And the elements are then represented in different parts of the plants. The earth is in the roots, water is in the stems, air is in the leaves, fire is in the flowers, and ether is in the seeds. The cardiovascular system unites all the elements through the physical systems. And in the cardiovascular system, earth is in the iron and the minerals, water is in the plasma, air is in the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, and fire is in the heat and the control of the nervous system, control of the cardiovascular system. And the ether flows in and around us, our emotional hearts. We're saying that this is a three-dimensional way of plotting our different capacities of the herbs, and when we taste a herb, very important you taste your herbs. It will tell you if it's hot, cold, wet and dry, and also tell you if it's uplifting or downward moving. And when you speak to your patients, then take a decent case history, then you should be able to tell if they're hot, cold, wet and dry, and if they need uplifting or they need soothed and calmed.
The first plant I'd like to talk to you about is plantain. This is the ribwort plantain, or Plantago lanceolata, or to give it its Gallic name, Slan Luce. This is the new leaves, bright new green leaves. It's interesting, this Gallic name, Slan Luce, means the healing plant, the plant of health, and quite a recommendation it comes with that title. It can grow quite big if you let it. It's always been known as a wound herb, hasn't it? But energetically, it's this amazing balance between moist and dry, containing mucilages and tannins, and books will recommend it for both to moisturise and to dry. It's an amazing balancing plant in that sense. So you can have a real crinkle to the leaves. It's got longitudinal leaves, but it can have a real crinkle to it. And you can just hear the ravens chipping in here at the end. So it's taken over a whole area of the field here, and takes over. It doesn't dry very well. We're wondering, I've been experimenting with the juice and using that. The flowers start at the bottom and move up like little sparklers all the way up. So then the flower moves up, right up to the top. Interesting that tasting these unopened flowers, we got a taste of a mushroom. And then doing the research later on, we found that the unripe seed heads did contain ergothiamine, the amazing mushroom compound that's done so much, it's been so famous recently for helping neuroneogenesis from mushrooms like lion's mane. We see here the ribwort plantain at the top, one we've been studying, but here spreading out we see some flatter leaves appearing in the undergrowth. Now there's the ribwort plantain at the top. Amazingly, this leaf and this leaf and the leaf at the top here going right out here are all coming from the one plant, and here's even a low growing flower stalk at the base. And this was the plant that the Romans put in their sandals to help them march. It has this amazing flat, the low growing flat is the Plantago major, the large leaf plantain. You can see this long stalk coming down, a really low growing habit, and then this flower stalk coming out. Even the flower stalk is laying low, and there's a reason for that. So this is a close-up of the leaf of the plant the Saxons called waybread. I suppose it was always at the side of the road. Culpeper felt it was a herb of Venus and would help any afflictions of Mars. This is the underside of the leaf. Interestingly, in the Highlands there was a belief that the top side of the leaf was to heal, and the underside of the leaf generally was to draw out or to suppurate. So this is where we live, in the amazing island of Arran, looking out at the islands of Plada and Ailsa Craig in the distance. Very elemental place to study herbs and plants. So it does have parallel venation, but it's not a monocot. It does have veins in between. So in terms of pharmacology, the plant contains allantoin from that we know from comfrey, salicylic acid from aspirin, the polysaccharides, the immune stimulant polysaccharides, and a chemical called aucubin, which is anti-inflammatory, anti-everything, seemingly. This is where you'll see it growing to the side of a gravel path, even in the gravel path. And the major, often dusty, it can be walked on, it survives in the most inhospitable areas, it's always around. You can see the flower spike coming out here. And this little plant in the gravel, not very tall at all, but it's produced and reminds us of the other species that we use. Psyllium seeds give this amazing mucilage. So throughout history, human beings have always venerated the Earth Mother, the goddess, and this is a sculpture from 8,000 years old in Turkey. I'd also like to talk about the male energy in this as well. This is a sculpture from Asia, and we see this figure with plants coming out of their mouth. And this was then taken up through the Middle Ages in sculptures in lots of churches and lots of other buildings. And we see here, it doesn't look very comfortable sometimes, but this common motif of plants growing out of the mouth of the figure. And we know it now as the green man. Sometimes I think the ones that are carved of wood look a lot more benevolent. My favourite one is this is Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. It's called a herb garden in stone because it's so amazingly carved, and it's just south of Edinburgh. And it has my favourite green man, a real real mischievous looking one. And as I say, this was a common motif throughout history as a parallel with these straw bears in Germany. So that there's a tradition through Europe has to have a close-up of the two guys that are in these costumes. I don't know if you can see that clearly, it's a bit of an old picture. But yes, this common theme of celebrating plants as well. And here's a figure that's entirely covered in plants, and it's from a Scottish festival. And as we'll see, he's completely covered in the fruit of one of these of a particular plant, and he's also holding staffs decorated with plants. And you begin to see as we come in closer, I wonder if you can recognise what plant he's covered in. Certainly by now you should have guessed that it is our wonderful burdock. It's a very ancient ceremony, and it goes back, written records certainly go back to the 1600s, but I imagine it went back even longer than that. And so the whole is completely covered in these burrs. And this happens in South Queensferry, south of the River Forth. You can see the iconic Forth railway bridge in the background. So he has it's quite an effort, I think, and he walks for 9 hours around the town. It's interesting, this plant being venerated in this way, and you give him money and he gives you good luck back, and good luck goes back to the town, and so the town has kept doing this throughout the ages. This is the Arran Herb Farm in late spring, and we can already see the clump slightly left of centre there of the burdock already ahead of itself, ahead of the other plants. Give you an idea of scale, that's the potatoes, 2 rows of potatoes just coming up behind it. So already well ahead, well established from its 1 year's growth in the last year, spreading out these quite massive leaves now. And these are the young ones coming out of the ground. As you know, most plants that we eat are biennials, so the plant stores up the food in its roots, which we then eat. So energetically harvesting the 1-year-old plants at the end of the summer and autumn would give you the sweetest roots. If you wanted more bitter, then you'd go for the spring of the second year. So in the second year, the plant uses that energy stored in its roots to produce these amazing, massive leaves, and then these huge flower spikes. And here it is growing next to its friend Inula helicampane. So again, these massive leaves and this huge towering spike of flowers going up to the heavens. Just to give you an idea of scale, this is in late summer, and I'm amazed at just how tall both the Inula and the burdock have grown this year. I put a garden fork in there to give you an idea of scale. And so it produces these beautiful flowers, thistle family of course, and like all thistles, then we're going to use it for the liver. So we now know that the plant contains plant sterols, and these have been shown to be hormonal balancers. It also contains polyacetylenes, and these have been shown to have an antibiotic action. Wonderful plant. It also contains inulin, which we know from Inula helenium has an immune modulator effect. The plant also contains chlorogenic acid, which is said to be anti-inflammatory, and arctogenin, which blocks HIV. The Latin name is Arctium lapa, and the Scots Gaelic Shertkin, which also means beloved. It's used traditionally in France for boils, acne, herpes, ringworm, and to help in the treatment of syphilis. And the roots were roasted like coffee, and the leaves could be smoked. So it produces these marvellous burrs. You can really see the thistle here, and these amazing hooks that were the inspiration for Velcro. The chap invented Velcro had to wait for years before somebody invented rayon and could actually make the things. So then, it's 2 years are up. It comes to the end of its working life. This huge structure that's built up then has done its job. You can see the loads and loads of buds forming on the leaves, but now these massive leaves will just decay and die back. But of course, any animal or gardener that tries to get through here will get covered in these sticky burrs grabbing onto you. It's Latin name lapa, meaning to seize. Then here at the base we see the next year's growth, signs of regeneration and hope for the next year. So as I say, when we take the root of this plant medicinally, we're taking in this huge plant, aren't we? This massive structure. Gathering the seeds is interesting. It always ends up in a ball. When we do gather the seeds, the ball tends to end up looking like an animal. Don't know if you can guess, but to me it looks like a bear. Which brought me full circle when I realised that Arctium comes from Arctos, the Greek for bear. So the next plant we'd like to talk about is depicted here by the Swedish author and illustrator Elsa Beskow in her book The Festival of Flowers, and the plant here in the centre is depicted a bit like an old hedge witch. Elsewhere in the book she shows the plant as being more like a green equivalent of the thistle standing beside her, and both images are relevant. When you study this plant experientially, it does come across as this amazing tribe, these clumps of plants growing together with a communality, and they're armed. I wonder if you can spot some other Celtic favourites in the picture there. So of course we're talking about nettles, and I've used the plural here intentionally. The Latin name Urtica dioica, and the Scots Gaelic Fiantac, the G being a K. When you study this plant, what comes out is how animalistic it is. It's, as we'll see, has two sexes like human beings, It also has a sting, uses formic acid as its poison, the same that ants do. It's serotonin, acetylcholine in its roots, neurotransmitters. It's amazing. And it's such a strong plant. It's such an amazing food plant. This is late autumn in Scotland, but these nettles are looking really fresh, and that's because they've been cut over the course of the time. Take the local kids out for outdoor school, and they're fascinated to learn as boys and girls, and ask them, which do you think stings the worst? And the boys always say, the girls sting you worse, and the girls always say, the boys will sting you worse. So normally you find the two sexes in different clumps. Here they are growing together. They're more often in separate clumps. And remember, these are clones, the original clone army. They're all growing off the same rootstock as a clump, and this brings the tribal image really to heart, doesn't it? So on the left here we have the male, dangly, more spindly, and pointing out a bit outwardly a bit more. It blows off, the pollen explodes off these when it's ready. It's quite startling actually. So the female has a lot more downward gesture, laden with seeds, heavy now in the autumn with these seeds ripening. And it's interesting, the seeds are seen as a male tonic, but of course the seeds are coming from the female plant. Celts were great ones to celebrate. The beginning of May is a big celebration, and in Cork it's called Nettlemas, and on the night before the 1st of May, the 30th of April, the boys and girls used to go around with nettles, bunches of nettles, stinging each other and any passer-by that wasn't quick enough. In West Galway there was a tradition of drinking nettle juice on May Eve to keep a good fire in them for the year ahead. In the Highlands, a poultice of nettles was used on the forehead for insomnia, and the roots were used for TB. Such a useful plant, and would be part of everyday life for the Celts. The poet Campbell reports, in Scotland I have eaten nettles, I have slept in nettle sheets, and I have dined off a nettle tablecloth. And there's a history of forcing nettles at early spring greens, like a kale. Walter Scott has in Rob Roy, the old gardener in Rob Roy, forcing nettles under glass. Where would we be without nettle soup in the spring, nettle beer, nettle pudding with other vegetables mixed in, nettle tea for the hay fever and to build blood. There's an old saying, eat nettles in March and muggins in May, muggins being mugwort. And as a food, there's not much finer mineral supplement than this plant. And so to this plant's unique ability to sting. And again, all these amazing animal chemistry, histamine and acetylcholine, and all achieved with a plant-made hypodermic needle that can break at the lightest touch, and a poison delivery system that delivers it into your skin. So we've all been there with the painful nettle rash from blundering into nettles. But it's also a therapeutic strategy, urtication, the beating of the body with nettles. And the Romans seemingly brought their own version to Britain, still found, it's rare but still found around Romney where they landed, to rub and chafe their limbs, for the cold was said in Britain that it was not to be endured. So all in all, a real fiery plant. And say you had a really inflamed joint, well, adding fire to it may be not a good idea. But if you think about an old stuck arthritic joint, then actually the beating of the body of that joint might be an idea to add fire into the system. The French herbalist Mézières recommended the beating of the buttocks of old men for impotence. There's a saying about grasping the nettle, and I can let you make your own experiments with that. Although I do find if you don't get angry when you get stung and just say, oh, sorry, then I feel at least it hurts less. Another slant from grasping the nettle comes in the form of sympathetic medicine, in that it was believed that if you pluck a nettle and said the name of a person, then that person could be cured of a fever. It's an amazing ancient plant. I like to think of them as plants that thought, let's become animals, and then thought, no, let's just stay like plants. Back in the day when plants thought, let's have two different sexes, but then thought, maybe that's not such a good idea. So it's not only us that eat nettles, everything else does as well, and home to lots of caterpillars, and again, such an important part of the ecosystem. So this ancient strategy of separate sexes. So, but which one would you pick? They look quite different. Do they have different therapeutics? So you said that it contains serotonin, neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, another important animal neurotransmitter. And we'll find more of these as we explore the brain. And we've discovered a complex group of lectins called urtica dioaglutinate. And that's important because in the body we have a thing called sex hormone binding globulin, and this, we know the nettle root to be effective for benign prostate enlargement, and we think that the mechanism is that this UDA, the lectins, has a balancing effect on the binding globulin to help shrink the prostate. So an amazing plant the Celts would have well known and would have used every bit of it.
So in the film there, we looked at plantain, and I was saying, Danny, this dichotomy between wet and dry, this mucilaginous plant, this tannin plant. I just wonder where you saw it in relation to that.
I think most plants have a certain degree of tannins present, and it's all about the ratios at the end of the day. Sorry, stumbled there.
Did you want to start again?
I was waiting for you to.
I was waiting for you to just jump in with what you were talking about.
Okay, so you're still recording?
Yeah.
Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes, so it all depends on the ratio between tannins and the polysaccharides, the mucilaginous compounds in the plant. And it also depends on their extraction method as well, in terms of what ratio you'll get in your extract.
Yes, it was in terms of the experiential work we've done here. We had this, we mentioned in the film there, we had this experience where in tasting the unopened flowers, the new flower buds, we had this overwhelming mushroom taste. And then later we discovered that it does actually contain this ergothioneine, the marvelous compound that we find in mushrooms for neurogenesis, etc.
Yeah,
so we remember you suggested we put it in glycerol.
Yes, so the extraction method there was to actually freeze the buds first overnight, and then take that out, begin to thaw it, and then pour glycerin on it. And what happens is when you freeze substances like that, they expand and some of the cells will burst, helping to give a better extraction method.
Yeah, I think we froze it in the glycerol as well to good effect. Yeah. So we know it very much as a spit poultice. It's one of the first herbal first aid remedies, and you can see from its lineage that it really does the job there. But you were talking about the biofilms, etc., that bacteria can create in our guts. That plantain was one of the plants that was effective against that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why certain types of infection are difficult to work with is because they can form biofilms, which are almost like a little protective envelope around themselves. And on the surface of this envelope are little structures called efflux pumps, which, for example, if you try to treat with antibiotics, they literally spit the antibiotics back out. But one of the useful things of Plantago is it helps to break down and deactivate those reflux pumps, or efflux pumps, excuse me, allowing you then to get your anti-infective agents closer to where you need them.
So
Yeah, I
there's,
mean,
sorry, the wonderful nettles.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, one of the cornerstones of herbal practice, of course, in many parts of the world, is the nettle. And it's strange, Keith, as you say in the video, about this kind of dichotomy between, nettle being a fiery plant because of its sting on the one side, and yet it's so cooling and drying on the other side of the spectrum. And it's interesting, when you take the nettle and you put it into water, cold or hot, the water neutralizes the formic acid and the sting. So it's interesting, this kind of fire and water meeting and neutralizing that aspect of the plant.
Yeah, such an amazing, vibrant plant, isn't it? And so nourishing as well,
Yeah, one of the things that I do with it is I make separate tinctures of leaf, root, and seed, and then I combine the three together, and that's a wonderful tonic. Those lovely thick yellow roots, and with the seed, I harvest the seed at the green stage, so not before it's gone too dark or too brown. And the ratio is 50% leaf, 25% root, 25% seed. Great tonic. It's a cornerstone of all herbal practice.
Excellent, excellent. Well, here's the nettles.
Good one.
So burdock, an interesting plant, and interesting to see that we have inulin in the root as well.
Yeah, so inulin acts as a prebiotic. It's one of those types of fiber that feeds a broad array of microbes in the microbiome, and it can be combined with slippery elm powder and licorice in a capsule in equal ratios, and that can be taken concurrently with antibiotics, and that will help to prevent dysbiosis or displacement of good gut flora when you're taking antibiotics, which is often a consequence that can leave you with things like thrush, for example.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and there's this thing that we're giving in our training as well. Don't use too much burdock at the beginning of a treatment. So we use it obviously as a cleansing agent. Use it a lot in eczema and psoriasis and things like that, but particularly eczema. And you're told in your training, don't use too much to begin with. You push too much out too fast. It made me think about the fact that we have we can be a bit of chameleons as herbalists. If you think of homeopathy, then generally, and I think homeopaths would agree, you take a remedy and you're meant to get worse temporarily. And so if you go back to the homeopath and you're not worse, then they're going to be upset. But with herbal medicine, people will come back and say, I'm worse. And we'll say, well, you see, you have to get worse to get better. But then if they come and they say they're better, we don't then bemoan the fact they're not worse. That any of that makes sense. But we can be chameleons in that sense. But it is this, isn't it? It's driving from the interior to the exterior and seeing that sort of law of cure is still an interesting part.
Yes, it's one of those things that I mean, it's not one of our strongest alternatives, but at the same time, and as you said, a good enough dose that will certainly start to shift things. And this idea in the old textbooks of dirty blood, and that eczema being a consequence of this dirty blood, and alternatives cleaning the blood cleansers. Now, essentially what's happening is that you're enhancing the organs of detoxification. But with eczema, you can sometimes then push this toxic debris out through the skin, a kind of vicarious elimination. And so you need to be careful with that you don't overdo it, as you say. But then again, it depends on what you also add into your mix, in your formula, because you can help to prevent that in some ways as well, depending on what else you add into that formula.
Cool. Excellent.
Now, blackthorn, Prunus spinosa, also known as strafe in Gaelic, a member of the Rosaceae family. The flowers, bark, leaves and fruits are aperient, astringent, depurative, diaphoretic, diuretic, febrifuge, laxative and stomachic. Blackthorn is of course the ancient tree of the Celts. It is often held in superstitious regard, and indeed the Gaelic name strafe may be associated with the English word strife. Blackthorn is also often associated with the Cailleach, the goddess and ruler of winter. In Celtic folklore, the Cailleach emerges at Samhain, equivalent to our modern day Halloween, to take over the year from the summer goddess Brigid. One portrayal of the Cailleach, of which there are many, is of a blue-veiled old woman with a raven perched on one shoulder and a blackthorn staff in hand, which she uses to create mountains, lakes and valleys, and also bring about snowstorms and rough weather. In Scottish Gaelic, the word Cailleach literally means veiled one or old woman. It was thought unlucky to bring it into the house, and it should not be burned indoors. Indeed, many years ago, I was burning it indoors, and a guy called at my door and he said, "You should not be burning that inside the house," and I didn't take him seriously. And shortly after he left, indeed, the fire started to spark, and one of the burning embers exploded from the fire and set fire to my settee. So I learnt the hard way how to respect blackthorn. The blackthorn is associated with the darker part of the year. It is a prickly shrub with long thorns that can cause septic wounds if it pierces the flesh. It produces bittersweet berries called sloes that ripen after the first frost, usually around October in this part of the world. The berries, if they're very tart, can be wrapped in straw and left for a few weeks to sweeten. A long thorn should be selected, and each berry should be pierced 3 times before infusing in alcohol. The resulting liquor is tart and bittersweet about 6 weeks later. The blackthorn is often associated with overcoming obstacles for a better future, or protection and hope in the midst of devastation. Interestingly, the flower comes before the leaf. The tree bears musk-scented small, delicate white flowers with oval petals clustered into a star shape in early spring. Blackthorn in bloom is considered an emblem of life and death together, as the flowers appear when the tree has no leaves. It is not much used in medicine, but it does have considerable therapeutic range. For example, it has a hypoglycemic effect, similar to Vaccinium species, and is useful as an alterative, laxative and diuretic. The berries are especially astringent. A liquid made from the boiled leaves can be used as a mouthwash for sore throats, tonsillitis and laryngitis. A decoction of the bark has nerving qualities, and the flower has been used historically for insomnia. It should not be consumed in large quantities for long periods of time due to the presence of hydrogen cyanide. A syrup of the flower is useful in shortness of breath and respiratory distress. The antibacterial action of this herb, the antibacterial action against Streptococcus mutans can help to reduce the incidence of tooth decay and dental caries. It is rich in the powerful antioxidant rutin. An infusion made from the dried flowers is used for blood cleansing and skin disease and rheumatic complaints. It is useful in digestive orders such as variable IBS And what I mean by that is the type of IBS where you're getting variations between constipation and diarrhea. The wood of the blackthorn is traditionally used in Ireland to make a type of club called a shillelagh. And it was originally used as a weapon to settle scores, and it is now a symbol of heritage among many people of Irish descent throughout the world. Is the honeysuckle, or fathlan, as it's said in Gaelic, Lonicera periclymenum. And there are a number of other Lonicera species that are used, including Lonicera caprifolium, the goat honeysuckle. So, generally speaking, we use the leaf and the flower of this herb. The berries are quite toxic. In other parts of the world and other species, the berries are edible, but not in these ones. Now, the old name woodbine describes the twisting and binding nature typical of honeysuckle's growth pattern. It's interesting when you look at this. In Ireland, for example, this pattern of twisting and binding is associated with the manifestation of will. Okay. It is also believed that honeysuckle grew around the entrance to a home that would prevent negative forces from entering the house. Bringing flowers indoors would also bring riches, it is said. And those who wear honeysuckle flowers are said to dream of their true love. Its intertwining nature in the language of flowers is a symbol of unity. It is also believed that if the blooms are brought into the house, then a wedding would follow within a year. Now, the honeysuckle is very rich in phenolic compounds and can have up to 2% flavonoids by weight. It also includes salicylic acid. Its uses are antibacterial, antiviral, diuretic, antispasmodic, expectorant, laxative, anti-diabetic and antioxidant. And where I think this herb comes into its own, and this is, you can also read this in the historical literature, is in the use of all lung conditions. Traditionally in Ireland it was also used in jaundice, thrush, burns, consumption, or what we now call tuberculosis, whooping cough, asthma, all respiratory distress, nervous headache in the form of a hydrosol or distilled water, and splenomegaly or enlarged spleen. The leaf decoction is used for liver and urinary tract infections. A poultice is sometimes employed for hard swellings. A flower syrup can be made for the cough, and a cream is also made for sunburn, and a gargle for the sore throat. I use a tincture, probably about 1 to 2, 35% extraction, mostly of the leaf, the upper leaf and the flower. Culpeper states that only the leaves were used to treat coughs and obstructions of the liver and spleen. However, Gerard had the flowers steeped in oil as being good to help warm and soothe a body that is very cold. Despite its lack of any real economic use, honeysuckle was regarded as a lower division of wood in some versions of the old Irish Brehon laws. The Brehon laws were an ancient system of law in ancient Ireland. It is also linked by some medieval scholars with the ancient Irish Ogham alphabet, or an alphabet of symbols, each of which represented a tree. Now, interestingly, honeysuckle is also a good antiviral, and in today's world that is something that people should pay more attention to. Now, eyebright, in Gaelic we call this Glanrosk, and its Latin name is Euphrasia officinalis, and it's a member of the Scrophulaceae family. Now, this tiny little plant is a joy to behold, but you really have to get down on your hands and knees and get close, and maybe even use a lens so that you can witness its true beauty. Up close, those little flowers look like little purple runways for insects to land on and collect nectar. And the name of the herb comes from the Latin euphrosyne, which means gladness. So eyebright is traditionally used for all afflictions of the eye. It has a mild tonic action, and it is also a good astringent, and this tightening and toning action makes it useful in ophthalmia and general weakness of the eye. Culpeper commented that if this herb was used as much as it is neglected, it would half spoil the spectacle maker's trade. And it is the case that it is not a widely used herb in the modern day compared to how it used to be. In Ireland, it can help you to see that which can't be seen. In the northwest of Ireland, it is known as fairy flax, and legend has it that the fairy doctor of the little people would use it for countering the evil eye. As well as its use in eyes, I have found it a helpful component in a formula for hay fever, or indeed any upper respiratory conditions such as sinusitis and ear infections. It is used in homeopathy for hay fever, incidentally. And it contains quercetin, which likely plays a role in stabilising mast cells and quelling histamine response. And I would combine that with stinging nettle and bical skullcap, Scutellaria bicalensis, for this purpose. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that eyebright does not have good keeping qualities, doesn't last long. So I have a tendency not to dry it, but I make a fresh tincture, and I literally walk along the pathways picking the herb and adding them to the alcohol. Some herbalists believe that eyebright has a greater affinity for the sinuses rather than the eyes, and is particularly useful in otitis media, these kind of stubborn middle ear infections. It does indeed contain many anti-inflammatory compounds, which suggests its use it may have many other uses as well. For example, it contains apigenin, a type of flavone, which has shown some anti-tumour activity in some studies. It also contains a wide range of vitamins and minerals. For example, it contains vitamin C and beta-carotene, which of course is the body can convert into vitamin A, which is a very important vitamin in eyesight, and is also a major antioxidant. Minerals include manganese, selenium, silicon, zinc and magnesium. Interestingly, it's also a minor source of cobalt, so therefore it could produce vitamin B12, although unlikely enough to meet nutritional needs and would not be reliable as a dietary source. In a prospective cohort trial involving 65 subjects, researchers concluded that euphrasia single-dose eye drops can effectively and safely be used for various conjunctival conditions. A dosage of 1 drop 3 times a day seems to be the general prescribed dosage. The herb is generally under-researched. For many years I couldn't find any eyebright in the wild, and then about 5 years ago I started to see it everywhere. Maybe it was me that needed to take the herb myself so that I could find it again in the wild. You'll often find it growing along paths or cliff edges. It is semi-parasitic, and its phytochemistry may alter slightly depending on the variety of grass it is parasitizing from. I'm sure there are related species in many parts of the world, including Canada, and it would be great to see this herb getting wider attention.
You mentioned the blackthorn there.
Yeah, so Prunus spinosa, I mean, it's not widely used in herbal medicine, but of course there's a lot of myths and legends around it. I'm reminded of one when they were trying to build the railway track from Belfast to a town north of Belfast called Ballymena, and there happened to be a blackthorn tree in the Rawe. And try as they might, the authorities couldn't get anybody to remove the tree, such was the superstition around it. And eventually they had to call the army in, to do a controlled explosion. And the interesting part of the story is that the guy who performed the explosion actually died a year later in a train crash. But the real most interesting part of it all was after the explosion, they found the remains of Celtic spears, shields, knotwork, and so on. So there was an archaeological treasure underneath that tree. So it's interesting the way people think these things are superstitious, and yet they were obviously preserving something underneath that tree, and that's been passed down the generations. So there you go.
Yeah, it makes sense to have a taboo against cutting anything that has a fruit. Cutting it down, the fruits. So the other herb you mentioned is honeysuckle.
Yes. So you and I have talked before that this idea of the honeysuckle, when you look at its stems and branches, how it intertwines amongst other plants, and is indeed self-supporting at times, and it moves and twists its way through the canopy and then produces this beautiful flower on top. It's fascinating stuff. Do you use that much yourself, the honeysuckle?
I've been infected by your ideas, yeah, of late, for its use in immunity and stuff, using the flowers for that.
Yeah, it's very, very apt at the minute. Its antiviral and its respiratory support activity is very topical, shall we say, at the moment.
Yeah, wonderful variation here in colour.
Yes, I mean some say that we also have Lonicera japonica, the Asian variety, which is a garden ornamental, and it's probably kind of crossed with some of the native varieties. So that's probably why we have so many variations in the color, which you could see in the photographs in the video.
Yeah, such delicate perfume, wonderful perfume. And then you mentioned eyebright.
Yes, so euphrasia, this tiny little herb, which seems to have quite a singular use, for the eyes, in terms of making it into eye baths. But it also has some useful upper respiratory activity. It does help to stabilize mast cells, so it makes it useful in hay fever, for example. But any kind of mucousy, sinusy kind of upper respiratory condition, particularly where the mucus is thick and not moving, I find eyebright very useful. What about you?
Yeah, I suppose it's got a bit typecast.
Yeah,
I love finding it in the wild.
yeah,
And it's semi-parasitic on the grass.
yes,
Grows in, but it's just, I mean, the flower is just so beautiful. It's like tiny orchid when you find it, and when you find it in the wild here, it can be quite low growing, but out away from people and away from munchers, it can be really quite tall. Well, when I'm saying really quite tall, a foot high.
Yeah, it can clear a foot and a half. Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool.
Okay. So we hope you enjoyed our presentation there.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a brief introduction into a few of the many herbs that we use. And we hope you found that useful. I'm sure some of you use some of those species in Canada as well.
Yeah, they're fairly ubiquitous, I would think. And it's just interesting the insights you get from actually studying the plant, sticking with the plant in an experiential way. As we said, some of these things you can't get from books, but you can get from studying with the living plant. Yeah,
I mean, you have to get that direct tacit experience of working in the wild with the material and exploring it with your senses, getting the smell and the taste and the texture and the locale. All of this is information that I think that kind of amalgamates in your head and gives you new ideas. As you say, some of these herbs can be typecast. And yet it's when you explore that you start to get fresh insight and new ideas and new possibilities, which often translate in clinic practically later on.
Yeah, matching those patterns you see in nature to your patients.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, our websites will follow to keep in touch, and as I say, we have our Celtic Herbal Medicine book available. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and thanks for everybody behind the scenes who made this conference happen. We applaud you. Thank you for your efforts, and we hope to see you all again sometime. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.